Thanks, Wade. So as Wade said, I'd rather have a conversation than give a lecture. So interrupt me, make smart-ass comments, heckle, whatever you want. I tend to be pretty casual in how I do things, so let's just get at it. As Wade said, this is a project funded by CARE. This came out of a rolling debate Wade and Rob Moyer and I have had about differences between different regions of the country and whether or not they're systemic, and what some of the implications of those differences might be should they exist. So here's the alternate title. Are people from Saskatchewan really that boring? The short answer is yeah, they are. It does take 3 days for your dog to run away. You know, I can keep going.
The land is flat.
That's flat. And it's cold. I'm very pleased to be here in the balmy tropics of Newfoundland. I got on the plane yesterday morning. It was minus 45. So this is a vacation for me. So to understand the context of what we're trying to do with this project and to kind of give you some sense of what's happening here is I got to kind of back up and take sort of a long run at this. So what is economics all about, really? At its core, it's about people making choices, right? And why do people make the choices they do? What choices might be better or worse for them, given scarcity and their objectives, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, hopefully that's not news to this audience. But what's the point of experimental economics? Okay, so experimental economics is an attempt to address a real-world problem. You know, theoretically, economics makes this really heroic assumption, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, which in the real world, come on, really? That's not going to happen, right? So what we want to do in experimental economics is we want to control for as many of those other things and hold them as equal as possible. But we're going to do it in a very controlled, sometimes you'd call it a contrived setting, the laboratory. So we're trying to understand the way that people behave in response to meaningful incentives. So all the experiments in this particular piece, and to be classed technically as experimental economics, have to be motivated. There's got to be cash on the table. There's got to be a reason for the person engaged in the experiment to care about the outcomes. It's called induced preference. So we're going to put cash on the table. And that makes us distinct from a lot of the more classic psychology that got done and still going on, where they just pay a show-up fee and your answers have no impact on what happens to you in the experiment. But we're also going to control in a very tight way for a lot of different things. It's not going to be perfect. We're not going to be able to control for everything, but we're going to come a little bit closer. So what's the point of this experiment? There's a lot going on here. This is a big experiment with a lot of different data and a lot of different moving parts. So the first question we want to ask is, we're getting people to do a battery of experiments. Not a single experiment, but a bunch of experiments all together in a row. So the question we're asking is behavior of these individuals consistent across experiments? Well, why is that an important question to ask? Well, first and foremost, are we measuring in these experiments the things that we think we're measuring? If we think we're measuring altruism, well, a person should, if they're truly altruistic, if that's a base part of their personality or a core characteristic of them, that they should be altruistic in multiple settings, right? If they're cooperative, they should be cooperative in multiple settings. Okay? So are we actually capturing in these games what we think we're capturing? So if we're not observing some consistency of behavior, either the instrument we're using is invalid, or we have a really bad understanding of human behavior. And either one of those things says we got to go back and think about this a lot harder and a lot more. So that's one question. Is behavior consistent across places? We in Canada have a federal structure that assumes that one set of legislation on a lot of high-level issues is appropriate for all kinds of different regions. But if the human beings in these regions are likely to respond to the incentives created by the policy or the legislation differently, then we're going to get suboptimal outcomes. So are there systemic differences in how people in different places respond to the same incentive? And if there are, then we need to think really, really hard about policy. We also need to think really, really hard about experimental economics. Just because I get one result in one place doesn't necessarily make that same result applicable in multiple other places. So again, the final point I want to make is we want to understand what drives the behavior within the environments that the games capture. So if we get past those first two hurdles, then we can take a deeper look, and we've done some things that aren't typically done in experimental economics, to take a deeper look at what's driving the specific behaviors and what are some of the factors that are going to serve as predictors of behavior in these types of environments. Okay, so that's the why. So here's the what. First game we had subjects to is the ultimatum game. This should be fairly familiar to some who've done some game theory or bargaining theory. If not, I'll walk you through it right now. So the ultimatum game, really simple concept. So we're going to play an ultimatum game. Let's say we've got here, well, I forget how much, I don't know if I trust Wade or not. So he's found $100. He's going to make an offer here. Okay? He's going to offer to share some or none of the money with you. Okay? And you, if you say yes or no, if you say yes, then the division happens. That's great. If you say no, I take all the money back. So Wade, go ahead.
Better take it.
So there was $100. Are you going to take it? Or are you going to say no?
Why not? Take it.
Okay. So one of the things that happens consistently when you do this in the laboratory, offers as low as 20% are routinely rejected. Okay? So if this was real money and you were a poor, starving student, and this, this was the share of this was the difference between having a decent lunch or yet another batch of Mr. Noodle, you might say no. Wade's being too selfish. He's not sharing this money appropriately, so you say no to get back at him. Spite is real. Okay? That's what's going on in this game. So we have our subjects play both roles, both the role Wade was in and both the role you were in. Okay? So you get to play the role of the proposer. You propose a division of the money. And we're going to do that with this slider here. The further across the slider gets, the more of the pie you're offering. And then we did what's called a strategy elicitation method for the responder. And they said, so if you get offered 0, would you take it? Yes or no? If you get offered 5, would you take it? Yes or no? And we've got responses all the way down. Okay? There are two interesting things going on here. From the responder's point of view, why would you say no to any positive offer, right? That's a basic game theoretic response. The game theoretic solution to this is really simple. Offer the smallest amount possible, which Wade did, right? And accept the smallest amount possible, which is what happened with you guys. But if you are actually concerned about fairness, if you're actually concerned about equity or equality, then there are reasons to say no to an unequal distribution. And what we can get at with this game is some sort of sense of how much people care about equality. Okay? So that's the ultimatum game. But there's a problem with the ultimatum game. There's a risk that you're playing with someone who doesn't behave as an economist would. Right? So what do? Well, you inflate your offer out of fear of a rejection. I might not be playing with someone who's perfectly rational or thinks about this game the way I do. So I'm going to inflate my offer, not because I care about them, because I'm worried they might do something irrational. So you inflate your offer. Okay? So the ultimatum game, from the proposer's perspective, isn't always a clean indicator of altruism or preference for fairness or equality. So we get the dictator game. Dictator game's even easier. Basically, Wade's got some money, he gets to share some or not, and the game ends. The responder, the person receiving the money, doesn't have a say in what happens. They just get some or they don't. So again, really, really simple. All you do is say, I'm going to give some money, slide this over, and you're done. Okay? This is a very clean indicator, relatively speaking, of altruism. Okay? Sender-receiver game, I've done a lot of work on this one. It's fun. So imagine you come into this experiment. I've got two envelopes, one labeled A, one labeled B. You look inside each envelope. Envelope A has $15 in it. Envelope B has $5. Okay. So, but you don't get to pick an envelope. You don't get to keep these envelopes. You get to send a message to someone else. That message says either envelope A has more money in it or envelope B has more money in it. The other person doesn't get to look in these envelopes, but they get to pick which one they want. Okay? Make sense? So what message are you going to send? A had 15 in it. B had 5. Are you going to say that envelope A has more money in it? Or are you going to say that envelope B has more money in it? Well, if you say B, you've lied. Right? You said something that was not true. The other part about this is you can tell whether or not the person is following instruction. And one way to interpret that on behalf of the responder is blind trust. You get this message out of the blue that says, you should pick envelope B. Do you follow that instruction or not? It's blind trust. Okay? So again, you can say, I'm going to say option A will pay you more or B will pay you more. The way this is set up, obviously saying B is a lie. Okay? All right? And again, you get to either accept the advice or reject the advice, and we're interpreting that as sort of a blind trust measurement. Okay?
So is deception your topic for research?
That is one of the things I've done, yeah.
Requires a lot of research ethics.
In this particular game, because the structure is fairly simple, it's not as bad as some of the psych stuff they do. Because I'm not deceiving any of my subjects, I'm letting them do it to each other. So, but yeah, this took a fair bit of effort to get through ethics, because we had to go through ethics at 3 different universities, and they often disagreed with each other. Oh yeah, this is fine. No, you got to change this. And then you go back and no, that. Just talk to each other, figure it out. Okay, sorry, rant. We also had them do the prisoner's dilemma. Again, hopefully that's vaguely familiar to everybody. Basic kind of environment. You have a strictly dominant strategy here, and we're assessing this as cooperation versus defection. And away you go, right? So clearly the Nash equilibrium is everybody defects, but the socially optimal is everybody cooperates. Okay? And we're going to see what happens. We also did 2 other things, 2 other motivated experiments. We did a risk attitude. This is based on Laurie and Holt. Very simple price list method to elicit a risk attitude. So basically, you go through and you say, you go through these only appear one at a time. So you say, okay, I got option A, lottery A, or lottery B. Which lottery would you like, A or B? Well, you click on one. So you say like A, right? Say, okay, then the next one shows up. Would you like A or B? Click A, A, A. Oh, that starts to look a little better now. B, 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 B. Where you switch from A to B tells me about your risk attitude. Because A is clearly the safe lottery. There's not a lot of difference between the 2 outcomes. But once you hit about here, then it starts to be a better expected value on this side. Okay? So it tells you me about your risk attitude. And then at the end of the experiment, one of these lotteries, so either this one or this one, is randomly selected. You play that lottery, and you get paid for the outcome. Okay? So you get to pick one of, 10 lottery tickets, and you'll play one of those lotteries. Okay? So you also asked them to do a time preference experiment. This was a bit of a pain in the butt for those running the experiment, but thank you for pulling it off. One of the problems in policy particularly is time preference. People have an innate preference to want it now, right? Think about when you've written an exam. When do you want to get that mark back? Well, if you think you did well, you want it back right away. I'm getting looks from you guys. I'm thinking it didn't go well last time. So, still waiting. Okay. So, but sooner is better, right? If you're going to get something good, you want it now. So here's the question: would you rather have $4 now or $3.50 in a month? Well, I'd rather have $4 now. But when I get down here, would I rather have $4 now or $5.75 in a month? What would you pick? Not obvious, right? It's not an instant answer. Would you rather have $4 now or $7 in a month? So again, the same process. You went through and you picked 4, 4, 4, 4, 5, and then you switch, right? And where you switch tells me about your rate of time preference. Yeah, there's a problem with this methodology is that it blends time preference and present bias together, or discount rate and present bias together into one thing, but it's not bad. We're just using it as a sense of the cost of waiting. Okay? And again, one of these is picked randomly, and that's the one you get. Okay? So those are our motivated experiments. One of the different things that we did compared to a lot of the other experimental work that uses these games is we did a fairly large socio-demographic and psychological profile survey. So we asked a whole bunch of different questions: sex, age, marital status, income, whether or not you're employed, cultural background. We ended up not doing a lot of analysis with that because it was all over the map, and the one cultural identity that turned up a lot was Canadian or hyphenated Canadian, and that mapped to some other stuff too tightly, so we just kind of dropped it. Rural, urban, whether you consider the place you grew up as being rural or urban, are you a city person or a country person? Faculty of study, arts, business, etc. Happiness, life satisfaction, right? We did those on similar scales as is done in the general social survey. We also did your sense of belonging. Do you feel like you belong to the university campus where we're running the study? Do you feel like you belong to the province you're in, or do you feel like you belong to Canada? So some sort of sense of belonging. Again, this is all just responses, no motivation, no deeper testing here. We're just asking the question. Religious importance. One of the weird things that came out of some of the work I did on deception was that people who told me religion was important to them were also significantly more likely to lie.
It depends on good way or bad way.
I could be. I've got two possibilities that I've got an experiment I've got the data from. I haven't analyzed it to my satisfaction yet. There are two possibilities here. One is a group membership effect. So if you're highly religious and you think that most other people aren't highly religious, there's going to be a social distance between the two of you. And so you're not going to feel as bad about lying to this other, right? The greater the social distance, right, the less you care, the less empathy you feel. And this goes way back to Smith's other work, right? Theory of moral sentiments. So that's one possibility, is that there's some social distance effect or group membership effect. The other possibility with religion is that it's moral licensing. I'm a good person. I go to church, so I can afford to lie this time, right? And both of these things turn up. I haven't really analyzed the data to my satisfaction yet, but it's not obvious how that's going to play out. We also, this is new. This is, to the best of my knowledge, this has never been incorporated in an experiment before. It's it's a really, really simplified mock scale. So in psychology, there's this set of things they call the dark personality traits. They're negative personality traits. And they tend to get lumped into this thing called Machiavellianism. I'm not a psychologist, so bear with me if I stumble here a little bit. But what we did is we took 4 elements of that mock scale, that dark personality trait measurement system, and we asked people about them. So are you willing to sabotage others, was one question. Do you enjoy controlling situations? Is accumulating wealth important to you? And is it okay to take advantage of others' weaknesses? So those are the 4 questions we asked, and it turns out that they're pretty important. So this was one of the novelties that we added in search of that third question. This was actually Rob Moyer's idea. So here's the data collection. We had 255 subjects, which is pretty big for an experiment. In 3 locations. This was done in Saskatoon, up at the Social Science Research Laboratory at the University of Saskatchewan. U of R doesn't have a lab, unfortunately. done here in St. John's. And just to make life confusing, it was also done in St. John. And the number of times I have tripped over that giving presentations and everything else. St. John's and St. Okay. So we've done, and there were a minimum of 80 subjects in each location, and all used the same software, all saw those same screens with the exact same instructions. So we've controlled for to make it as identical as possible between the locations. Not perfect. There's a different person running the experiment. So I'm sort of rambling, but let's run with it. There's a very famous piece by Mazar and Ariely. And I always forget the third author. They do a deception test. But the person they're lying to, the subjects are lying to, is the experimenter. And they never tell you who the experimenter is in the research paper. They don't tell you if it was one of the authors or if it was a grad student. So was it a professor or grad student, an RA, somebody else? They don't tell you if the experimenter was male or female. They don't tell you if they were tall. They don't tell you if they were a native English speaker. They don't tell you if they had a good rapport with students. Is this someone, if it's a professor, is this a professor that students like? Or is it a professor that students think is an arsehole? Right? Because all those things are going to matter. They're going to change that dynamic and change the decision to lie, potentially. Okay? So we're trying to control for as much of that sort of thing as we possibly can. Okay, so what happened? Basic results. Here are the results, basic results from the survey. Sorry it got cut off here. So it's about half and half, slightly more females than males in our sample. The age is skewed upward, pulled upward by a few outliers in each sample. I think the people from Saskatchewan lie a little bit on income. I don't buy that. It doesn't turn out to be terribly important. But they are also more likely to be employed. You've got a lot of come from aways at MUN. So come from aways are people who are in that province who tell me in the data that they are not from that province. Happiness. The happiness and life satisfaction was interesting because it's a lot lower than is reported in the general social survey. Okay? So if you ask Canadians generally through Stats Canada, I mean, how happy are you or how satisfied with life are you? These numbers tend to be 8 or 9. So apparently being a student sucks. Okay? Or maybe it's just at these 3 universities. When did we do this here? Leah, do you remember? March. So, okay, maybe just March in St. John's is miserable. Right. Belonging, sense of belonging to campus. People generally feel like they belong to campus. They feel like they belong to the province, and they definitely feel like they belong to Canada. So, okay, that's kind of nice. Do you there wasn't a lot of volunteer hours. The mode here is 0, so a lot of people don't do anything. Religious importance. This was higher than I was expecting, but that's kind of interesting. Now, the mock scores, thankfully, they're not terribly willing to set it. This is slightly less. This is on the negative side, but not by as much as I would like. Right? It's below the mean, the middle. Enjoy controlling situation. Yeah, university students like controlling situation. Okay. Accumulating wealth. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Why are you here, right? Students in the room, why are you at university? Honestly. Yeah, to get a job and to get paid, right? You want to get paid. So, yeah, of course, accumulating wealth is going to be important to you. Taking advantage of others. Most people were actually fairly positive on that score as well. Okay. So, the basic results in the games. The ultimatum offer, this is weird. There was $10 to be divided. Some people tried to give away the whole thing, which was just odd. So I think they weren't reading the instructions. Okay. I have tried to code it with the offers of 10 being treated as an offer of 0, and the offers of 9 being treated as an offer of 1. Doesn't change much. There weren't enough of them to move the dial in the more rigorous analysis, but it does change the average. The minimum acceptable offer, these are more reasonable, and they're more in keeping with what we see elsewhere. So the ultimatum game has been done all around the world in very poor places where they're playing for like a month's wages to very wealthy places where they're playing for pennies. But these are consistent. Dictator offer, again, slightly inflated, but one thing you'll notice is it is lower than the ultimatum offer. So we are seeing this sort of fear strategic response in the ultimatum game to inflate your offers. We did have a glitch with the data collection with the software in Saskatchewan. That's where we ran first. We didn't catch it in our pilot study. And unfortunately, we failed to record the situation because it was a randomly determined which had more money in it, envelope A or envelope B, and we didn't record which one had more money in it. So I'm like, oh crap, we don't know. So I don't know what happened there. I do have information from other studies I've run, and these numbers are about right. So I would be comfortable with it. If this was like 56 or 50 or 58, I'd be, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Trust, you guys are suckers. Look at this, look at it. 56% of people in Newfoundland lied. 95% of people in Newfoundland were trusting. So half of you got taken. Okay? You're a little bit more cooperative than others. You're a little bit more risk averse, and you have about the same time preference. Yeah. I'm not going to get into that here. I'll do that later. But in this one, yes.
In terms of lying, is there any incentive given to the person?
Mm-hmm. They're playing this envelope game. Remember I said you've got two envelopes,
Yeah.
A and B. A has $15 in it. You get to keep one of the envelopes.
Oh, okay. Whichever one was left over.
That's right.
That's incentive to lie.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to tell. If you and I are playing this game, I'm telling you B has more money in it.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know you, so too bad for you, right? Yeah. So there is an incentive to lie. This is lying for payment. Okay. This is being a good lawyer. Okay. I'm not amused with lawyers at the moment. Okay. So the problem with this, and this took actually a really long time to figure out how to analyze the data, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it and kind of asked Wade, and Wade said, "Well, do what you want." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So what we're doing here is what's called the factor analysis. It's very, very common in psychology, and what it does, it allows you to look and see if it appears that different things are being driven by the same underlying characteristic. So it's basically creating a bunch of boxes, and you go through each of the things you measured, and you go, yeah, that fits. So you put several things in the same box, and then you can estimate what they've got. And unfortunately, I lost my bolts when I transferred this over. The numbers greater than about 0.3 are ones of interest. So if you look at this first factor, happiness, religious importance, and life satisfaction, all three of those things go together, and this data technique is telling me that those three things are driven by one common underlying characteristic. So again, we can do the same thing here. Belonging to campus, belonging to the province, and belonging to Canada. Belonging itself is there's a general sense of belonging that drives all three of these elements. Okay, so I'm because of the results we got out of this, I'm not terribly worried about this technique. I think it sort of makes sense. So what we ended up doing is we ended up with 5 factors that were driving a bunch of these other things that we were able to observe. So, and what were they? And don't get hung up too much on the labels. The labels are completely arbitrary. I sat down at the keyboard and said, what's in this box? Okay, I'm going to call it this. There's no rhyme or reason to these labels. They're purely arbitrary, right? So I called one good life. That's happiness, life satisfaction, religious importance, and volunteer hours. Right? All of those things seem to be driven by one characteristic. Belonging. So belonging to campus, belonging to the province, belonging to the country. One characteristic called belonging. Equitable. If you made a high ultimatum offer, you also made a high dictator offer. So you have some sort of preference for equity is how we're labeling that. Machiavellian. So there are 3 things in there that if you scored highly on, you enjoyed controlling situations, important to accumulate wealth, and it's okay to take advantage of others. Those three things were driven by one underlying characteristic, which we're going to call Machiavellian. And money, which is, that's the label I'm least satisfied with. If you have high income, but you also have a time preference issue, okay? So those things go together. They're driven by one characteristic. So for a lot of the rest of the analysis, I'm going to boil all these down. I'm going to include, so instead of including all the individual things on the right-hand column, I'm going to include an estimate of the characteristic on the left. Okay? So what do we get? What am I doing for time? I'm cruising. So looking at the ultimatum games, I can't use the equitable characteristic here because I've got one of the characteristics of it in there already. So I've got it as my dependent variable, so I don't want to put it in as an independent. That would be silly. So I'm putting the dictator offer in itself. And again, if you made a high dictator offer, you also made a high ultimatum offer. So again, if you care about equality, you care about equality. Right. Now, if you feel like you belong somewhere, okay, that's kind of cool. The more you feel like you belong to the campus, the province, the country, the higher your offer is. Right? And if you're living a good life, this is weak, but it's there. Right? If you think so if you have high happiness, high life satisfaction, things like that, you're making a lower offer, which is kind of bizarre, right? I'm happy. Yeah, screw you. What do you do? And that's, and the other, if you're not local. So there's some relationship between belonging and coming from away. It's not local. But this is the whole sample. One of the things we discovered, that despite these three campuses having vaguely comparable levels of students from outside the province, students from outside the province and outside the country, it turns out, are much more likely to volunteer for experiments. So a lot of our sample was not local. So, okay, let's run the same analysis just on the locals. And what do we find here? Again, Newfoundland, Labrador. If you're from Newfoundland and Labrador, you make a higher ultimatum offer. Same result here and same result here. But you also get this interesting effect with the minimum acceptable offer. Once you switch it only over to locals, this is reinforcing that base preference for fairness, right? You're going to reject offers. You're more likely to reject a low offer. Why would you reject a low offer? Because you have an innate interest in fairness. Okay? Like I said, stop me at any time here, guys. We're cruising through. So minimum acceptable offer, what drives that? So again, if you are satisfied with life, you're not fussed. You're actually less concerned with equality. Right? If you're comfortable, you're happy, you're not driven by equality in the same way, which is kind of neat. If you're wealthy or if you have time preference, you're going to demand more. You're more demanding here. And if you're risk averse, and this makes sense, because remember, it's a strategy elicitation method. You don't know what the offer is before you say whether or not you'll accept it. So if you're risk averse, you're going to go, yeah, I'm going to say yes to a low offer just in case I get one. Okay? And New Brunswick, this was really neat. New Brunswick shows up as different. People in New Brunswick seem to be more motivated by equality than in other places. Right? We can see the same thing when we switch over to locals, turns up again. Okay? So people, New Brunswickers are willing to cut off their nose to spite their face. They will turn down cash if they don't think it's a fair deal. Well, what are the implications of that? What are the implications of saying no and blowing the whole thing up, making sure that nobody gets anything if the deal's not fair? I think it might have some explanations for economic development. Could play a role. You're willing to see nothing happen if you don't get a share. It's possible. So again, if you're good life, you're lower. You got a lower acceptable offer. If you're Machiavellian, sorry, that's a typo. That should be a negative. Just caught that now. I got to change it. So you can see there, if you're Machiavellian, you're willing to accept the inequality. It's not that big a deal to you. And again, see the same result with risk. Okay. Dictator offer. If you're living a good life, you're less generous. If you're Machiavellian, you're less generous. And if you're from New Brunswick, you're more generous. Again, we're seeing a pattern develop here. New Brunswickers are more concerned about equality than people in Newfoundland or Saskatchewan. Go ahead.
Well, this is all relative to Newfoundland.
So basically, the way the data selection works, it allows me to put one in any of the three. I don't have a set control. So the way the data selection methodology works, the model selection methodology works, it puts each one of these in at a time and sees which one is effective. That way I don't have to worry about having, because if I made it the same one all the time, I'd always be testing relative to that one, and then I have to go back and test relative to a different one. Because what if, so if I have Saskatchewan being the control all the time, and neither New Brunswick nor Newfoundland turn out as different from Saskatchewan, I can't then say that they're not different from each other, because it could be this one's lower than Saskatchewan but not statistically different, and this one's higher than Saskatchewan but not statistically different. But they could be statistically different from each other.
You just got one to one.
It rolls through. So I've tried it with all three, and New Brunswick is the only one that shows up.
Every time.
In as significant in the model specification. Sorry, is that clear-ish? So the upshot of it is I'm fairly confident saying that New Brunswick is different from the other two. Okay. And again, risk attitude, this was interesting. Kind of makes sense, though, that you're going to see the risk attitude turn up here. You're going to make a lower dictator offer if you're risk averse, because hey, it's an opportunity. If there's no risk here, I can just take it. Okay. Again, when we control for locals, suddenly New Brunswick disappears, though, which is interesting. So it's not obvious. The sample size shrinks when you move to locals only, so it's not as generous as, it's not as robust as I'd like it. But the interesting thing here, being married makes you generous. Or is it just generous people get married? There's all kinds of smart-ass comments there. But again, sense of belonging really messed things up a little bit. And being a cooperator turns up. So that's kind of interesting. We're getting tight fits here, but don't go too nuts on the fits. Lying, this is fun. So if you're Machiavellian, you're way more likely to lie. If you're wealthy, you're more likely to lie. If you're Canadian, you're a lot less likely to lie. And if you're married, you're a lot less likely to lie. Okay. So that's kind of neat. Trust. You guys are really, really true. Here's the answer to the question you asked earlier. Yes. That's huge. I mean, it's really comfortable. Now, also, if you valued equality, so if you gave a high ultimatum offer and you gave a high dictator offer, you also get a fair amount of equality. Or, you're more likely to trust. Excuse me, I misspoke. Okay. What I found interesting is this. The more averse to risk you are, the more trusting you were. So it seems like something's happening in the minds of the subjects as they go through this, where the default option appears to be to accept the advice you're given. And moving off of that and doing something different is seen as the riskier option. So that's interesting to me. Prisoner's Dilemma, not a lot here. This Prisoner's Dilemma seems to be a unique game. It's not driven by behaviors much in other environments, except equality. The preference for equality made you more likely to cooperate. Okay. Prisoner's Dilemma, if we get locals only, you guys aren't very cooperative. Sorry. And the interesting thing here, being married also did not make you cooperative. Maybe you're generous, but you like to fight. I don't know. So some of those things are kind of interesting. Time preference. So this is, we're getting towards the end here. So which is perfect. Leaves lots of time for questions if you have any. Time preference. This is the more likely you were to pick now versus later. And again, if you were living the good life, you wanted to get paid now. If you made a the higher your minimum acceptable offer, the more likely you were to want to get paid now. Higher your income, pay me now. If you're a male, pay me now. Okay? And we can do the same. We do it with locals only. Again, same kind of pattern, right? It's those three that matter, right? If you have a high minimum acceptable offer, you're not prepared to accept an unequal situation, pay me now, right? If you're living the good life, pay me now. If you're male, yeah, well, males, pay me now, okay? Risk attitude, if you're married, you are more risk averse, right? Makes sense. If you're living the good life, you're willing to take a little more risk. If you come from away, you're willing to take, it's just weakly significant, but it's there, right? Makes sense. Moving to another place is a risky endeavor. So, hey, you're going to have a higher risk attitude. This strategic component is something I played with on and off. The idea was that it's the difference between your ultimatum offer and your dictator offer. So it's the amount by which you inflate your offer in the ultimatum game due to the risk of rejection. Okay? But again, it turns up in this one case, so I don't want to put a whole lot of time and energy into it. And belonging might matter a little bit in some of the specifications. Okay? Locals, again, it's the same: married, good life, and Machiavellian. Machiavellians were more risk averse. That's an interesting result to me. What it says to me is that people take on these dark traits in response to risk. It's a way of managing risk. So you're gonna seek control over a situation in order to manage or mitigate risk. You're going to take advantage of others in order to control or mitigate risk. So there's an element there, and I haven't been able to find anything that I've been satisfied with in the existing literature on this. So this might be something that I can chase at a later date. So punchlines. The dictator and the ultimatum games are linked. Yay, there is a core consistency of behavior there. Good. That means we're not totally nuts. The other games are mostly independent, so there's not a lot of interplay between the other games and well, any of the other games, among the other games, I should say. Newfoundland and Labradorians make higher ultimatum offers. They have greater trust. I don't understand why. And they're more, less cooperative. But New Brunswick was more demanding. Okay? Questions? First of all, thanks everybody for coming out on the Friday before break. Go ahead.
The study focused on New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and then Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly we can see that there's some kind of consistency of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But is it fair to say that consistency of behavior across Canada, considering the fact that the focus was on these three in terms of economic, well, they will be at the bottom of the echelon. Is it fair to say that it's across Canada?
No. I can't make that inference. So these three places are vaguely comparable in size and relative place in the hinterland, if you will. Right? They're not, they're not the center. Right? I often tell jokes that Toronto just thinks it's the center of the universe, but it's not really. So, is Toronto different? I don't know. I don't have data to support that. My suspicion is yes. Is Montreal different? Yes. Is Quebec? If I were to do this in, If I were to do this in Trois-Rivières in Quebec, would I get different results? Very possibly. So is there more to be done here? Absolutely, yes, there is. We've got the framework, but you only have so much money, and you've got to find somebody on the ground to run these things. So if we did them in Montreal, if we did them in Vancouver, if we did them in Edmonton or Calgary, would we get different results? Absolutely possible. I don't know. It's a good, very good question, though. Yes? Sorry, I'll come over to you because I think I'm getting deaf.
Yeah, no, I haven't talked yet.
Okay.
So, in line with what Joseph just mentioned, how you can use this data to make a general conclusion about the provinces?
Again, it's this is time for a shaker full of salt, not a grain of salt. This is a small sample relative to.
Very small,
Yep.
relative to the size, and besides, based on the age, the average age was 24-ish.
They're university
So that's-
students.
Yeah, but
Yep.
24-ish would be graduates or more advanced students.
It's pulled up by one or two, right? So there are outliers there. So don't overread that too much.
Yeah, but how much they represent, even they may not
Good
be
question.
able to represent the universities
Mhm,
that
mhm.
they're representing.
Absolutely.
Besides, a big, large number of
Mhm.
those respondents are not from the provinces that,
Mhm.
based on what you just said,
Yep.
they're not from those provinces.
Yep.
So those are a little bit
This
shaky.
Yeah, well, there's a running gag in psych and experimental econ that, look, the undergraduate students are the most studied population on the planet, right?
True, like same thing. Like we probably the first time we run this kind of experiments with Harvard undergrad students, that
Mhm.
represent no way.
Tiny slice, yeah.
But still, since you are talking about comparison of the provinces,
Mhm.
that would be a little
It
believe problematic.
No, it is. I mean, with any of these results.
You're focusing on
Mhm.
this specific, like comparing this
Yep.
provinces.
No, you're absolutely correct. I'm agreeing with you. I will put in a however. So here's the thing: is when this has been done, most of these qualitatively, these results look exactly like everywhere else this has been done. So
Except a few cases.
yeah, there are some exceptions. Yeah, there are always some exceptions, right? So it's fairly consistent. Like, if, for example, let's take the ultimatum game, right? The offers are a little out of whack, but the rejections, well, between
It was like more than $6.
it was 60%. Yeah, if I take the ones out, they're getting pulled up by some outliers. Okay, I didn't want to pull them out because I hate throwing away data, but when you pull those out, they're about half, which is well within the standard band here, right? I mean, you get those offers that run for these stakes. They'll run anywhere from about 4 to 50-ish%. You'll get a few that report over, but not many. So, but on the rejection side, that's totally consistent. It fits, right? With the deception stuff, the rates at which people were choosing to trust and lie are exactly consistent. Like, they're within every one of those ones I've seen, particularly on the trust side, it's in that 70% mark.
Yeah, just getting back to what you're saying, that like the fact that they're consistent,
Mhm.
maybe it's just also some way showing that maybe it's not representing what exactly the province is saying.
Yeah,
That
could be.
a thing.
Yeah, it could be.
Kind of-
Could be. So one of the
But it's still,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the initial ideas, so this is a neat, I just don't want to lose everybody else because I'm into this. I want to go down this rabbit hole. One of the ideas with this originally was to ramp this up and run it alongside something like the GSS to get that broader sample and to go outside that ridiculously studied group and to see what happens at that larger scale. So in some ways, it's a proof of concept.
I know I took lots
Yep, keep going.
of time. Just one
Sure.
last question.
Sure.
I had some other questions. How do you think that those Machiavellian questions that you asked, did you ask them at the beginning of the?
They were at the end. So there's no possibility of priming. Right? That
That would be interesting though.
to
Is
see
that
if they
a
prime.
possibility?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that, still, even at the end, they are not affecting those results.
But those results might affect the answer to the Machiavellian question. Yeah, and that's a legitimate concern. There is no 100% correct answer to that question. Right? Do you put them first and risk the question priming the result?
If you put them at the end and you just want to see the first part, that's fine. But you could have randomized some
We couldn't done an ABBA, yeah.
Need to have a
Yeah.
large enough.
Yeah. We were having enough trouble getting this thing done as it was. So,
That's
yeah, and that's the question. I'm not as bent out of shape about priming as some people are, just because of the problem replicating priming studies. So, while I'm sensitive to it, it's like, I'm not as worried about it as I might be. So, but that is a fair critique, and one of the concerns that could happen is you get the ex post justification.
And the other person,
Sure.
like belonging and others also are coming after.
Yeah. So the survey is all self-contained, and it comes in one block.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, those are good questions. Detailed. That's awesome. Go ahead, Wade.
Research, there's two questions I had for you.
Mhm.
Is, what is the, bearing in mind the caveat that we just heard, what does your research imply for social capital?
Oh my.
Because you have issues around cooperation.
Mhm, mhm.
And you talked about religion and the probability of lying, and you
Right.
have a couple examples of that. Do you have any direct application to the federal liberals and the SNC? Does that have any?
From this work, I'm not sure I want to make those kinds of emphasis. Generally speaking, and given what I've seen about religion and belonging and social distance and some of these other things, the context in which people are drawn make their attitudes towards certain behaviors very different. So one of the really, really interesting things, a piece I've been working on, because another totally separate study I've got, is I got access to a bunch of Saskatchewan civil servants. And I ran them through a battery of experiments that look something like this, okay? I'm happy to come out and talk about that one at some point if you want. But what happens, and there's a really neat literature, there are, in more developed countries, it turns out that the people who want to go into the civil service, when you talk to them in university, tend to be honest, upright, activist, positive, yay, government's going to do all kinds of wonderful things for us. Okay? However, there's a bunch of studies done in India. And those writing or intending to write the entrance exam to the Indian civil service aren't that way at all. They're more likely to engage in deception. They're more likely to lie. They're more likely to cheat. They're more likely to have all these more negative traits or behaviors associated with them. Why? Well, because the Indian civil service is corrupt. So what am I saying in a very roundabout way? Well, what do we know about Quebec and tolerance for corruption? And we're seeing it play out right in front of us, right? There's all kinds of jokes about, who built Montreal. Well, it's the mob, right? The construction industry is not known to be clean. I mean, there's been, to the point where there's jokes about it. So am I surprised that you're seeing this sort of government patronage towards, and to the point perhaps of illegality with respect to a Quebec firm? No, I'm not. I could also be speaking with a huge chunk of Western alienation behind me too. So another shaker full of salt. Yeah, it's going to give everybody high blood pressure. But so on that front, yeah, there's consistencies in terms of the context and the behaviors and the choices. The people who are willing to engage in that sort of thing in one context are willing to engage in it in others, from the research I'm aware of. Is that an answer to the question? Sort of? Yeah, and there was another part there?
I was asking about social capital.
Oh, social capital. Yeah, that's an interesting piece, and you can see it sort of turn up with some of the where belonging enters and exits the system, right? So suddenly belonging turns up as important in a lot of different things and almost always in a pro-social manner. So I would say that sense of belonging could be an indicator of some sort of social capital, and that would give you the more pro-social behaviors. So you're making more generous offers. You're cooperating or collaborating more and that kind of thing. Go ahead.
Sense of belonging. So I think we found that's negatively correlated with
With which?
sense of belonging.
With which? I don't remember.
Generosity.
It's negatively correlated with.
Being generous.
Did it? I don't recall. No. Ultimatum offers go up. Goes up. So that's pro-social. Right. I'm being more generous to you.
Okay. So I mean, like being belonging to your country, it makes you more generous.
Yeah. That's the so you. Yeah. Okay. Let's be careful. It's not just belonging to the country. It's an amalgam of all three. Right. So I'm saying there's one characteristic belonging, and when I ask the three questions, I'm getting answers that all map together. Okay, so it all funnels down into one underlying feeling, if you like. I hate using that terminology, but is that clear?
So yeah, I heard that being married is making you more generous. And in one slide I found that that's like being married.
Where was it? That was towards the end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, here it is.
Actually, you see that?
Oh yeah, there. Wait.
Yes, negative.
Oh yeah. Huh. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the thing I was.
Yeah. Okay. So it's antisocial in this case.
Yeah. So why?
That's locals only. If we go back, it doesn't show up. So the people who are from away who have built up social capital, I don't have a good story.
So I think
I missed that.
the people who are patriots are those who think that this is my country or this is mine. So they will be doing a little bit big stuff. That they're thinking of things.
Could be. That could be. You feel a sense of entitlement is what you're arguing.
That's not good then.
No, I think that in this particular case, it could be very bad. I missed that one. Thank you. Good catch.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just in terms of policy implications.
Mm-hmm. With all the caveats we had earlier.
With all the data limitation.
Yep.
and
No, because I got called out on that. I got to acknowledge it.
Economics, right? There's no argument on that. So one is that the people from away, right, the newcomers, immigrants, whatever, are more risk-taking. That could have implication on entrepreneurship. We already know that.
Yep. I think it's fairly well
Which is
established.
positive, I think, on that perspective. The other is that, depending on different kind of public policy, some are more equity-based, others are more efficient-based. Your findings suggest that, those kind of policy could have differential effects on
Yep.
different provinces. So I think that's fairly important, policy implications.
I think so, yeah. Again, the policies, and this is one of the things that I do some policy work for the Saskatchewan government occasionally. And one of the arguments that always comes up in porting in so-called best practice is how is it going to interact with the local attitudes, population, et cetera, et cetera. So, and this is one way to sort of systematize that or attempt to. I don't want to make too many claims that we've done it, all the work that needs to be done here, because we clearly haven't. But it's a cause for concern, right? When you port in a policy that has worked really, really well somewhere else, but it's predicated on some factor, some facet of the local population, culture, context, it can be disastrous. Yeah.
The lack of a link between the trustee behavior in the send-receive game and cooperation is going on. That's the thing
I was surprised as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to know what your thoughts are about that. My initial thought is, does it have something to do with the difficulty of understanding what you're doing?
It might be the problem of understanding. So as a responder in the sender-receiver game, you have absolutely zero information. You are operating in a total vacuum. All you get that comes across from, well, I'll put up the instructions. All you get is you get this message says, do you want to do you want to accept their advice or do you want to reject it? And it doesn't say anything else, really. Here it is. Yeah, they're all one-shots. So, and they're not partners, so they mix every game. So there's no reputation effects, no reciprocity. So if I'm matched with you in the ultimatum game, I won't be, and the matching all happens at the end, right? So there's no opportunity for reciprocity or reputation or any of those other.
This is a custom-made software that people log into in terms of the.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's all one shot. So that has its own set of problems, obviously. Yeah. No, that's a good question. So you.
Yeah, no, it just occurs to me that Prisoner's Dilemma, when I teach students about it, it takes a bit
To get it. Yeah.
So maybe people just don't, maybe the trusters don't understand what the trusting response is in Prisoner's Dilemma.
Could be. I mean, it could be that. It could be that you get presented with this kind of information, and you just sort of shut down and choose vaguely randomly. It could be any there are a number of possible explanations. But if any of those explanations are valid, then we need to be concerned about drawing inferences from other studies that use prisoner's dilemma as an indicator of cooperative nature, and that's legitimate, right? So, again, this is the first time anybody's sort of. Well, there's one other study that puts a battery of games together, but not these particular games that I'm aware of, and we're starting to wonder. Right? I think this is important because it starts to ask the question about the consistency of behavior across different environments. Go ahead. Yeah, it's a full. That's entirely possible. Right. Yep. Yeah, and you're clicking on which one you want to do, but yeah, the software could have failed in terms of. Mm-hmm.
And instead of the table, like
Yeah.
the metrics, let's say if you choose up and I choose left and you get this and I get this,
Yeah.
then that would
They're-
be clear and we
Mhm.
see the actual behavior that we want to see.
Yeah.
Because this one is a little bit mechanical and
Yeah, it is. It is right.
isn't.
Leah, did you get many questions on this?
I did. So we targeted, I think, first-year economics students. So I don't know if they covered that in the fall term.
Right.
But I did note that, and I think I said it in your email as
Mhm.
well, that this was a problem for
Yeah.
students. But it wasn't a huge concern of mine because once I sat down with them and kind of explained how it worked, like they seemed to get it. But again, it is certainly.
You're only getting the ones who ask the question, though. So, yeah. Yep. That again. There are problems. Yeah.
The question is in support of what the professor said concerning prisoners dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think the concept of prisoner's dilemma is a misnomer because when you want to define prisoner's dilemma, you assume that the person is a prisoner in this case, but you want information to actually prosecute the two gangs. But we are already defining them to be prisoners.
Okay, so I want to be clear here. The framing is all neutral. Prisoners never mentioned. Okay, so there's no. We're not evoking that imagery here. Okay, so it's all. That's why the strategies or the options. I mean, there's a row player and a column player. You can go up. It's not cooperate or defect, right? The labeling is all really neutral. Rob's actually done some interesting work on this kind of game where he plays with the labeling to play with to give them different connotations. So he'll say cooperate, but cooperate is where the label cooperate gets put where we usually put defect. So he'll play with these kinds of things, and there was an effect, but it wasn't massive.
My own experience is that for my larger introduction
Right.
And if I explain the setup very clearly and write those down, I see the same result. Like I just say, okay, tell me how many of you is going to help the other person. I see the account, the hands. I get similar to what the other experiments are saying.
Right.
But if I just write that table, they don't understand this clearly. And they're just going to be confused for a while. What's happening?
It's possible.
So if you explain it clear, then the results will be pretty much different.
Yeah.
That's my experience with I had like micro 300 students class.
Right.
That I get this.
No, and again, that's always a concern with any survey or experiment. Are the subjects actually doing what you
What you want.
or what you think they're doing? Yeah. Are they answering the question you think you're asking? Yeah.
Many times they answer.
Yeah. That's right. They're out there. I wanted the answer to this, and you've gone over here and done this. Yeah. 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 So again, that's always a risk. And so? Can we definitively say that because of these results, there's no link between cooperation in the prisoner's dilemma and cooperation elsewhere? No, we can't make that statement. Okay. And now we're getting into basic philosophy of science here, which is it's a discussion I enjoy. But
How do you think? Besides the cooperation in this one and that one are very different.
yeah, and so
Cooperation in this one is a win-win situation, but cooperation on that one is a little bit of I give up, you gain some.
yeah, it's
Gain and you gain.
well, it's also risk.
Yeah.
There's more risk here. There's
But
so I'm comfortable saying they're different games,
the nature is
but that there's no we don't pick up any relationship in the behavior. Is the clearest, most neutral way to phrase the result that I can think of is that we don't detect a relationship. So back here, go ahead. You guys are asking really good questions. This is awesome.
So, do you have the chance to relate the financial well-being and risk-taking attitude of the observations?
It shows up. Just I'll flip to it. So the risk attitude measure I've got. Yeah.
Impact on financial well-being of the patient?
So money shows up. So money is my money. That money factor includes income. Okay, it shows up weekly as being more risk averse. But I'm not. I don't want to put a ton of weight on that. It's marginally significant, and it's only in 2 of 4 specifications. So.
How far you do observations like that, like from far from rational? How far?
Far from rational?
Yeah,
Well, rational in this context has no meaning.
So I mean that.
Or do you mean risk neutral?
Microeconomics. Okay, we think that a person is optimizer. So how far a person is?
I can't make, this is not an optimization problem. It's optimization subject to a personal risk attitude. So I can tell you how far they are from risk neutral.
Yeah, how far is it?
Risk neutral in this setup is switching after 4. The average switch point was 5.5 or something like that. So there's risk neutrality in the sample, but not insane amounts. So it wasn't a result that made me go, what the heck is going on? Right? It wasn't something like some of the other stuff. It was like, okay, I don't understand what's happening here, so let's sit down and try and recode this or see if this makes any sense. The results were a little more comfortable. So yeah. I mean, again, that's great we had that question so early on because I can keep coming back to it. We do have a very specific sample here, right? And these are, it's not a random sample. We're sampling from a non-representative population, and it's voluntary, right? It's not like I walked into a classroom and went, you, and you, come with me, right? So yeah, all those caveats really apply. Yeah, go ahead.
So you said a study. I'm curious what you think might be the most appropriate sort of cultural or other organizing factors to the extent of some of the discrepancies.
Whew.
So you mentioned the demonstrated around the world with Western societies versus post-communist societies, and that's
Right.
some differences. They look at large-scale societies versus like small-scale tribal
Yeah.
societies. And
Ostrom's work, yeah.
maybe I'm misremembering, but like stable markets, unstable markets, things like that. So, and another possibility, just
Mhm.
like all this, this is my first take on it.
Sure.
In different parts of Canada, it's more of an interdependent culture here, and people want to are aware of group norms and maintaining versus more independent places.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I have a couple of, actually, Wade and I are kind of starting to work on something vaguely along these lines, looking at differences in the evolution economically and regulatory, I guess would be a good way to say it, between Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. I have a set of theories that are, I think, we can go almost Innis style here and go back to, what's the staple? So I think fishing is going to generate a specific type of culture. So cultures that develop around fishing are going to be different than cultures that develop around, say, dry land farming. They're going to have a lot of similarities. Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, the weather will kill you, right? Depending on the time of the year, a lot faster in Saskatchewan, but it will still kill you here. So you got to be more dependent on your neighbors. So that's one element. But the private property nature of dry land farming is going to give you some differences than the common pool resource nature of, say, a fishery. So that's one element that I think is rattling around in here. The other thing is trying to figure out a label to put on it. I'm not really satisfied with this yet. Is stability of population, I guess. Right? Have you been, so Newfoundland, you go, how long have you been here? You could have families that have been here 400 years, right? Outside of the indigenous population in the prairies, if your family has been there for 3 generations, you're old. Like if you've been there, if your family's been there for 75 years, you're old stock, okay? So I think there's a cultural difference there. And I think there is I've lived like you. I've lived all over the country, and I think there are some interesting interactions there that are going to create different social capital structures. So if you're in a more established environment, an older environment, your social capital may be more family focused, and whereas if you're in a population that's predominantly immigrant, your social capital is going to be different. Is one hypothesis, and that's going to evolve to different choices. It's going to evolve in different ways. I think fishing. One of the reasons for doing this particular study was just the speculation I had that isn't borne out in this data, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, is that I expected a rate of time preference in the Maritimes and in New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Atlantic Canada to be radically different than the discount rate in Saskatchewan, right? The story I tell is that when it's harvest time in Saskatchewan, you go 24/7, flat out, doesn't matter what the weather is. If you can get in the field, you go, and you go until it is physically impossible to go anymore. Because if the frost hits, your crop really starts to lose value fast. Okay, canola is a bad example. Wheat that's been frozen is worth a lot less than wheat that was harvested at the right time. Whereas if you've got fishing seasons, but that's a different game, right? So the nature of the fishery and all these other things are going to factor in differently to give you potentially different discount rates. We don't see that in this data. So my original hypothesis isn't supported. But
Well, that maybe just because this is younger population, they're not in
could be, yeah. And Saskatchewan, so one of the weirdness, Saskatchewan and Newfoundland line up in some really interesting ways. We've both seen a lot of out-migration over the years, but some of it's been reversed lately. The old joke used to be the last person out of Saskatchewan, please turn off the lights. The 80s, it was hugely depopulated, way faster than Newfoundland was being depopulated. So there's that difference. And the small towns, the regional hubs, if you will, have all been shrinking. You drive around Saskatchewan, there are ghost towns everywhere, where it's just there was a town here, there was an elevator here, the elevator closed, the town is gone. So we've seen that pull in from the farm, but that's a generation ago. We're not seeing that. Much fewer of the students I have, the local students I have in Saskatchewan, are off the farm. They're more city kids. So, but what was interesting is the urban-rural divide didn't turn up as interesting in any of these samples or any of these model selections. So I'd like to think there's something there, but the evidence doesn't support it. Anybody else? Well, thanks everybody for sticking around and asking those were really good questions. Wow. Thank you.
So